Good morning, everyone. My name is Vijay Patankar. I was mentored by Clayton Greenberg. Today, we're going to be investigating one of economics' most heated questions. Does raising the minimum wage actually stimulate the US economy? You've heard the arguments. Some say it boosts spending, others warn it may lead to job losses. My goal was to take a data-driven approach to this. So before we get into my actual procedure, I want to give a little bit of context. GDP is the total value of all goods and services produced. Within the US economy, it was $28 trillion in 2023. It's known as the primary measure of economic health. There's two theories on this. One is that when minimum wage is increased, it leads to more spending by consumers, which leads to a higher demand in products, which increases the total value of all goods produced, which leads to an increase in GDP. The other theory is that when minimum wage is increased, demand goes up and there's higher business costs. When there's higher business costs, jobs get cut, which would decrease the value of all services produced. So the GDP would actually decrease from that. Okay, so what was my hypothesis or thesis? Despite heated political debate, minimum wage provides statistically insignificant predictive power for US GDP across both linear and Max models. You might be wondering, what's the difference between a linear and a Max model? A linear model only takes in a limited amount of variables, it's just correlation, while a Max model can take in multiple variables, so it's more accurate. So, here's some literature on the subject from Theory 1. As you can see from the Chicago Fed, when minimum wage was increased, there was $73 billion in added consumer spending within the US. However, the Congressional Budget Office also believed that when minimum wage was increased to $15, it led to 1.3 million job losses. So, since expert opinions are so divided, we need to rely on the data here. Data is objective. So, what did I actually do? For data pre-processing, I used the Federal Reserve Economic Database. My dependent variable was the real GDP, my independent variable was the federal minimum wage, and I had 8 control variables. What was the model architecture? One model was a linear model, the other model was a Max model. So how did I determine the best combination within the Max model of control variables? So since there's 10 variables in total, I did 2 to the 10 equals 1024 different combinations, which with each of those combinations, I predicted the GDP. I then analyzed how far that GDP was off of the actual GDP, so I could get the fit of the model. From there, I got the best fit of the model. This was evaluated through the Ake-Ake information criterion, where a higher value in AIC is actually signifies a worse fit for the model. After I decided the combinations, I had to test one with minimum wage and one without minimum wage, which would lead to 2048 total models. So, what were my results? Um, let's compare the linear model without minimum wage and the linear model with minimum wage. As you can see from the bar graph over here, they're about the same. This is very important. This means that adding minimum wage to the model's training data didn't actually foster an improvement within the model's accuracy. Similarly, for the Max model, we can see here that when minimum wage was included, the AIC actually slightly increased, which means that the model actually got worse when minimum wage was added. And also, I conducted a likelihood ratio test, and I got p equals 0.42. This means that my results were statistically significant. So what is the verdict here? Um, in the future, minimum wage debates should focus around social equity, not macroeconomic management. And why is this important? When policymakers are making policies, every little change affects so much. So they have to be extremely accurate on the way they address things. GDP predictions should emphasize consumer spending, business investment, and employment indicators. So, is this case closed? Here's some limitations of my research and what I'll do in the future. So, what are some limits of this? So, the data I got was national data, so it obscures state and local variations. Furthermore, the data was quarterly. This means that I can't view data within the short term. So, what are some future research directions I want to do? First of all, I want to do a state level analysis because it could be different within every state. I also wanted to do some regional economic modeling of those states. Thank you. So my key finding was that from over 1,024 mall specifications demonstrates that minimum wage has no predictive power on GDP forecasting. Any questions?
Very well done, Vijay. Thank you so much for enlightening us about this good work. My question for you would be, you mentioned this was, of course, excluding state and local variations. This project was national based on the GDP of the United States. But do you anticipate this project, the way in which you've organized it, being able to be successfully applied to the GDP of other countries? And what might that look like as we extrapolate?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. Um, when future researchers undertake my project, that's something that they could actually look into. Because within every country, these results may be different because policies are different in each country.
That is helpful context. Do you have, you mentioned, of course, your goals for future phases of this. Have you thought about how you might propose this work so that others, whether it's governments or officials on a local or regional level, can take this on that scale?
Yeah, that's also a great question. So, what my plan was, I wanted to give my research over to the representative of Washington State, and they would have an influence on the policies within Washington State. And I think locally, actually, this is very important. My research was inspired from my parents taking me to downtown Seattle. There's a lot of poverty in downtown Seattle, and I wondered, why are they in poverty? Is it because the wage isn't high enough? And that's why I undertook this project.
It's important to have that connection point to the humanity of this project and all of our projects. I mean, whether it's incarceration, this in poverty, it's access to AI writing tools and techniques. I mean, all of the projects our students in this presentation have shared, there's that human component, really quite relevant. And I appreciate you sharing that, Vijay. Another one of our panelists, Annika, has a question. Annika, go ahead and share.
Hi, thank you so much. This was really interesting. And as someone similarly interested in policy, I wanted to ask, how do you hope your research helps the Washington State Rep form policy around minimum wage, and what would you like to see?
Yeah, again, a great question. So in my presentation, I said that what my results were was that whether you increased or decreased minimum wage, it would have no substantial effect on GDP. So I implore policymakers to do more research on other macroeconomic variables and to not focus on GDP to not focus on minimum wage when considering the country's GDP.
Thank you so much for this, Vijay. Thank you for all of our panelists.